what we're recommending is keeping employees on for 2 weeks, for
so they can try to find a job. Yeah.
So they can find a job, so that they can wrap up their work. I mean, think about how much companies are losing by just cutting people off without transfer of work and transfer of knowledge. It's unnecessary. In many instances, it's unnecessary. So when we allow people to stay on, then they don't feel like trash. They might feel disappointed that they're losing their job, but they don't feel discarded. And they are able to close out relationships, give information to stay in touch, close out their work, really do the right thing for the organization as the organization is doing the right thing for them. And I think it really changes not only the dynamic of how people who have been laid off feel, but also how the organization continues to function at its best through this crisis period.
Welcome to Management Muse.
Because everybody deserves a better manager.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today on Management Muse. I'm your host, Cindi Baldi, and today I have two guests with me today. I'm so appreciative of both of you coming on. We have Collette Revere, who is with Open 360. You might remember her from such episodes as Performance Management. I like Collette so much. Actually, I like most of the people who come on here. So I'm going to say it was just, we had similar pet peeves, I would say.
Yeah. We have a lot of alignment.
Yeah. So that we kicked that off and we just decided we had to split it into 2 episodes. And then she was like, well, I need to get my partner in crime, Kim White, on. Kim White is from KimWhiteWow.com. The WOW stands for Work on What Matters. So I think that's a great acronym. So today we are talking about employee exits. And we are specifically talking about a term that you two coin it?
Yes.
So empathetic exits.
Right.
So let's kick this off. Who wants to take this? Let's see. Explain to us what an empathetic exit is.
So empathetic exits is really the way that we exit employees in organizations is often like an amputation. You know, we spend a lot of time and resources building relationships with employees to get better performance. And when their time for employment is over, we sever the relationship
pretty abruptly.
Abruptly.
I was thinking about it today, like just as a quick aside, like, have either of you ever actually fired anybody? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Super hard. I mean, it's even when they've really irritated you, you know that you are disrupting somebody's life in like a hugely fundamental way. So it's always very hard. And I was thinking about it today, you know, like we often, I think, say that we're sort of doing these brutal cuts because we're worried about like sabotage or whatever. And certainly there are people who will do that to you. But I also think it's that we know that even if they've irritated us, we're doing something significant to another human being. And we want to get that out of our face as soon as possible.
Absolutely. There's so much shame involved in the work of doing this. And Kim has some awesome information about, why it is that we do it this way. And the myths. Yeah.
Yeah. So it actually started in the late 70s, early 80s, when in larger companies, especially tech companies, it became trendy. Just a terrible word to use, but it became trendy to do mass layoffs as a business strategy. So something forward thinking versus something we need to do because the company's in financial trouble. So it became a little bit of a CEO and a leadership team's way of positioning themselves to either Wall Street or to investors of we're business savvy, we're strategic, we're going to cut, we're going to save money, we're going to be more efficient. So rather than being viewed as kind of a crisis situation, it became viewed as like this cool thing to do. And Collette and I were like, 80s trends, nope, those got to go, right? So really, I think understanding that this is a trend is really helpful. Understanding that means there's an option. There's a different way we could do this. And we don't necessarily have to do it, to your point, what feels like the quick and easy way. In fact, almost every study out there shows that layoffs, especially layoffs at scale, do not work. The impact on them is so negative in terms of engagement, employee retention. So the long-term impact is terrible.
I used to have a roommate. I've had a fair share. I've had really great roommates. I've been super lucky. I used to have a roommate who worked for a power company, and she's an engineer. And they were in the middle of like huge layoffs. Like every day, somebody would walk out of the building with a box. And so she started going in like really early in the morning, so that way she could leave before the end of the day and see the people walking out with the boxes, because it was just shattering day after day.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that we often talk about, Collette and I, is we're sort of on this mission to help people reframe how we let people go and how we exit people. And one of the first things that we like to talk about is really embracing this as it is a crisis. This isn't fun for anybody. This is hard on everyone, and it's impactful on everyone. And it's why it's worth doing it in a very empathetic way versus this old trendy way of, I don't know if you've heard this, but I certainly heard it many times in my career. Get them in there, 2 minutes, tell them they're gone. Tell them what their benefits are. Get them out the door.
You're doing them at the end of the day.
Try to do it in 2 minutes. Try to do it unemotionally, which doesn't work. We know that it doesn't work. And studies actually show that the larger companies who put aside money in anticipation of, like if we give people extra time, like you said, they'll sabotage. They'll delete things or they'll build a case against us. And lots of studies have been done that show actually those companies who put aside money to offset that never used that money. It actually didn't happen. And the cases of sabotage are actually quite rare. And they become even more rare if, guess what? We treat people well on the way out. That the sabotage actually occurs when people are treated really poorly.
Yeah, I can totally see that. It's a justice issue, right?
I think it's exceptionally hard now because in the 80s, we weren't as into having our employees, having relationships with our employees, having engagement with our employees, getting that commitment. It was the work and home lives were a lot more separated. But now
you were literally told to keep them separated.
Exactly. You couldn't, friendships at work weren't even encouraged. Think about that. And so now we have companies who are spending tons of resources on getting engagement from employees, building relationships with employees. And then in an instant, they sever that. And it becomes so obvious that relationship was truly just transactional and wasn't actually caring. And so that's part of our framework for empathetic exits, is that every healthy, balanced relationship has two aspects: relational and transactional. So the relational is care, respect, mutual regard. The transactional is roles, responsibilities.
Yeah, you show up to work and you get a certain amount of money for it. It's a transaction.
Yes. Right. And what companies are doing by severing that relationship is telling everybody else who still remains in the company that it's false, that this engagement that we're building, this loyalty that we're building, as soon as we don't need you as an employee anymore, it's gone for us. And what we're saying is there's no need to sever the relationship with people, and except for maybe those people that you have to escort out the door, and there's no choice. That might be a good choice to sever that relationship. But otherwise, guess what? You can turn former employees into new customers or new advocates for your company. When you treat them well as they leave, and when you don't sever the relationship instantly and give them the respect that we expect as organizations. I mean, we want at least 2 weeks, right? So when we give people that level of respect and don't cut off the relationship with them, that sends a signal of safety to the organization and the people who remain in that organization, that this is not only when I'm useful and then I'm invaluable or not valuable. This is intentional. This is true. This relationship with the company is true. And so that's what we're recommending companies lean on, is really understanding and paying attention to how they're treating employees transactionally and relationally, both when they're there and when they exit.
Okay, so let's talk about what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
What does an empathetic exit look like?
One of the primary things is give people time. This fast exit is, as you mentioned earlier, Cindi, it's about the managers and the people who are responsible for managing that process. It's about their comfort level. And there is a lot of shame behind it. And there is a lot of, fear about what are the responses going to be and how are people going to act. And let's just get this over with as quickly as we can. And that does a lot of damage to not only people who are leaving, but the people who stay in that organization. What were you going to say, Kim?
Yeah, I'll just add to that and say that even in voluntary exits, so sometimes if somebody has another job, they're leaving for another opportunity, exits can still be really poorly handled.
Oh, for sure.
And part of that is an interesting statistic that we came across in our research is that only 29% of companies have any offboarding program whatsoever.
I'm not surprised by that at all.
Very few companies have stopped to plan. Although they almost all have onboarding processes, they haven't thought about the very end of the employee life cycle. And if they do have an offboarding process, they don't include anything like a layoff. So we've really discovered sort of this gap in the employee life cycle. But what it looks like is we've come up with the framework where we really try to take the focus off where it is now, which is just the during. So we tend to think of, okay, we've got to let someone go, or maybe it's a bunch of people and it's a layoff. We're going to think about it the night before. That's when we do our planning. We're going to execute it the next day. That's done. Everything is perfect now. And that focus on the during is really what has left all of these gaps. What we propose is a framework of a before, which is a planning stage, a during, which of course has to happen. That's when we execute it and people are notified. And then a very extensive after period where we focus on the 24 hours right after the day of the announcement, the 3 days after, and then 3 months after. And in fact, as we have been talking to people, we're finding people telling us like the ripple effects of somebody leaving or a layoff can last as long as a year. So that the impact of departures can be really significant. And if we only think of it as just, it's that night before, it's that day of, and then we're done, that's really where the gap is. So we walk people through a process that's pretty heavily focused on, just to kind of summarize, it's pretty heavily focused on a planning period. So taking some time as a leadership team to decide, here's what our offboarding is going to look like. And we're going to do it empathetically in each stage of that process. So how can we do this empathetically? as we announce it? How can we do it empathetically in the days and weeks and months after? And really asking them to lean in to that kind of thinking. And throughout that framework, as Collette said, time, we're really big on decide what kind of time you want to give companies, and it should align with your core values. So one of the things we often share is if you have a core value of transparency and someone has been doing a poor job and they're suddenly let go, or if there's a sudden layoff that no one expected, you have just broken that core value. Mm-hmm. So in that before and planning stage, when you're not even thinking about who's leaving or why they're leaving, really sit down and plan out what that's going to look like and how you're going to do that empathetically, because then you have the blueprint and all of that is there for you to grab when you need it instead of this kind of winging it. So that's kind of one thing. The other is, we're big believers in asking yourself what support can you offer people? So as people exit, especially if it's an involuntary exit, what can we offer in terms of, job connections, helping them with resumes, writing letters of recommendation, getting them training. So what can we do to support people as they move on if it's involuntary?
I think that and I just want to circle back to that for just briefly. Like, I think that is so critical because they feel like they've been thrown out like trash.
Yes,
exactly.
And like, I've had a lot of conversations with people. Like once you have been involuntarily terminated, you definitely feel like, I don't know, you scarlet letter, like nobody's going to want you. You're the old dog in the pound. and, yeah. and so trying to help people get that story and also like show concretely, like, look, this wasn't like this person's fault. There's things going on in this organization and that's why we're doing this, but it's not because they're bad. It's because this was our protocol. And so they're the ones, somebody had to leave. This was our protocol for choosing. And so it's them. And you're getting a good employee, obviously to the extent that people are willing to do that legally. People are really wound up about making recommendations for somebody, but like, like even as simple as I would hire this person again. Mm-hmm. I'm giving them a letter of recommendation. I would hire them again. There was nothing inherently wrong with them.
Yes. And I think that's also one of the benefits of giving extra time is what we're recommending is keeping employees on for 2 weeks,
so they can try to find a job. Yeah.
So they can find a job so that they can wrap up their work. I mean, think about how much companies are losing by just cutting people off without transfer of work and transfer of knowledge. It's unnecessary. In many instances, it's unnecessary. So when we allow people to stay on, then they don't feel like trash. They might feel disappointed that they're losing their job, but they don't feel discarded. And they are able to close out relationships, give information to stay in touch, close out their work, really do the right thing for the organization as the organization is doing the right thing for them. And I think it really changes not only the dynamic of how people who have been laid off feel, but also how the organization continues to function at its best through this crisis period.
Another thing that we strongly recommend is making time to say very personalized thank yous to people who are departing, again, for whatever reason, whether it's voluntary, involuntary, singular, or part of a layoff. Taking time to say, Collette, the way you reorganized SharePoint last year we really appreciate that. It was such a huge, so just being really specific, not just saying like, oh, Collette was great. And you really added value. Well, those are pretty empty words. So give really specific examples and make sure that the employees who are remaining see you valuing that person as they leave. And it makes such a difference in how people feel about their chances, right? Because when other people depart, we are all watching and we're analyzing, oh, is this what's going to happen to me when it's my time? And so we're all judging. And it's why, retention tends to tank after big layoffs, especially if they're handled poorly. Then, it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen to me. So I'm going to leave on my terms. So it really sends a big message, and saying thank you, and not just saying thank you as people are departing, but continuing to say positive things about people after they have gone, not just, oh, well, that's a mess because Collette, how she was, so just remaining positive toward people who have exited also sends a good positive impression to everybody. So it's really being empathetic to not just the people who are leaving, but the people who are staying, and thinking about, their emotions and their thought process and their grief process. Really, they are going, if you've lost a dear coworker, it's a grief process.
It's an end. And anytime there's an end, there's grief. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree with you. The other thing I see with organizations and some of the damage that they do is in keeping, I think they screwed up in a couple ways. I think they're not very clear sometimes in the criteria in which they're choosing. This is on the layoff case. And so because they're not, everybody who's left is wondering, like, where do I stand? How do I know if I'm safe? Because it can seem rather ad hoc as to who got laid off. And that, I think that's part of the reason for, the loss in retention after a layoff. I also think sometimes it might be a little bit strategic. Like, I think sometimes organizations would rather have people decide, so they shake it up intentionally and hope that some of the people who have options are going to leave. Like, there was a few years ago, it was before the pandemic, I'm pretty sure. And like Yahoo had a new CEO, and it seemed, I don't know for sure, but it seemed intentional, the policy to basically be like, we're bringing everybody back in. You have to work from the office after all this time working remotely. And what it seemed like was, I'm firing you without telling you I'm firing you because I know you're not going to come back. And I don't want to have to pay you to fire you. And so I'm going to put some flaw in the system to force you to make a decision that I want you to make, but I don't want to have to take responsibility for making. That's just my interpretation of what happened. I could be wrong, but as an observer.
That's one of the best measures of what happens when you do it poorly. Because you just pulled that example out of your memory. And when we do this poorly, especially, maybe not if you're a smaller company, although, we live in a social world now. If I'm disgruntled, I can go to Glassdoor, I can go to social media, I can go to LinkedIn, I can get the word out. It doesn't matter how big or small the company is. If I'm unhappy about the way I've been exited, I can let people know. But especially for the larger companies, it's just your brand is potentially damaged. And we've seen lots of things happen with companies like Target, for example, where just, word gets out about certain policies and practices. And pretty soon it's really impacting their bottom line. So, yeah, I mean, we do talk about, when we do talks and in our workshop, we talk about that impact to brand and how really, when we go back to that before stage, planning, how are we going to exit people in a way that aligns with our company values and our brand and our culture? Because playing these little games or doing what everybody else is doing can really equal misalignment. And I think you're absolutely right to call out the Yahoo one. I had all the same thoughts. And we've seen it with other companies.
Oh, they're not unique that way.
They're pushing a button just to see who falls out naturally so they don't have to deal with it. And it doesn't really fool that many people, I don't think, and it hurts their reputation.
And so you've done a fair amount of research on this. What do you have some stats on, like, what the damage is for doing this wrong?
We do. They vary widely. And I think that is
and
partially
some of them aren't easy to measure.
The way that organizations handle it is not always the same. It's some version of the same thing. But generally speaking, when these types of layoffs are done, the true cost of the layoff after the crisis period is over is 2 times the salary of the person that they're laying off, because there's lost trust with the people who are remaining. So then you get less engagement, you get lower performance, you get misalignment, because often the after the person leaves period is not really managed. And that's, as Kim said, one of the biggest, that is truly the biggest part of our framework is after the layoff has happened, managing that piece and helping organizations and employees understand that when a layoff happens, you have a new organization now. You have to reset the culture, the expectations. Even taking one person out of a team massively impacts that group. So when you do that at a bigger scale, your organization is now, you have to almost treat it as new and start from scratch in terms of rebuilding the culture, reinitiating expectations, revising workloads, and things like that. But generally, it's about 2 times the salary of what they, I don't know how to say that.
2 times of what, 2 times the salary of what they had previously earned, I guess is the way to say that. And I do think that is still modest because
yes, it's average. That's average.
Right. Because obviously somebody with a lot of knowledge or a lot of good relationships will have an outsized impact.
Sure. Ideally, companies are measuring themselves. So we were talking to a woman the other day, and a couple of people actually whose companies do surveys. So we really recommend, that you have a regular practice of surveying employees about a variety of topics, but basically a culture survey.
You can come to our company and get that.
If you're doing that afterward, then maybe you can catch some of that sentiment and measure some of the impact. But you should definitely be looking at, your retention, the retention of the team around the departing person or persons. What does that look like? Because in larger companies, sometimes like whole divisions can go away and it doesn't necessarily impact everyone. But to Colette's point, on a small, high performing team, one person leaving can have a big impact. So hopefully we're measuring, consistently, and a company can pick up a little bit of an indication of what was the impact, and in terms of things like retention and engagement and satisfaction with management, satisfaction with the organization, and people's sentiment around the culture. Those are the warm, fuzzy things. And then, impact to bottom line, it gets, as Collette was saying, it's really difficult to measure because let's say we had a top salesperson and we lose that person. We can figure out pretty quickly, like, what revenue that person represented. But if it's somebody on the tech team, or somebody in customer support, it may be a little harder.
Somebody who doesn't have a direct
impact of that loss. Yeah.
Right. And, there's just a lot of asymmetry, I think, in the firing, even to the point where when it's done poorly, the leadership has thought maybe months, sometimes years about it, depending on the person. If it's a high performer, oftentimes a high performer who may have some other bad habits. Mm-hmm. And so like those tend to just spark a lot of thought before losing them or pushing them out. And so like the leadership team has spent a lot of time processing it, and there's an asymmetry there for the employee who basically gets the during. And I think that that's part of also, like you did say, like, hey, time is like the number one thing, but like, I think that's part of the time. It's like, we have been struggling with it as leaders, and it's been chewing us up, and we've been anxious about doing it. And now we're doing it. And then we just want it over because we've already been experiencing the pain, but it's a lack of recognition that the person on the other side has just begun processing and thinking about it, and then the pain and the implications of it. And I've often thought, like, why not? This is one of the other things that I see in layoffs that I didn't bring up earlier is, like, I think sometimes the intentions are good on the leadership team in that they try to hold on for as long as they can before they have to make an awful decision of laying off. Mm-hmm. And we don't want them to throw in the towel too quickly, but I think that they basically wait until they've painted themselves into a corner. And that's part of the reason why they do it then badly. And so we reward organizations who do these things well.
Yes. And I think, to your point, intent is often not bad. That's why this is so difficult for people who are leading layoffs to do, is because they don't want to do it. The intent is not bad, but the impact is, has really nothing to do with the intent. The impact is really shaped by the planning and preparation that's behind it. And so what we recommend is that people treat this like writing a will or, your normal dentist appointment. You don't go when you're hurting and struggling and suffering and tend to be more reactive. You create this plan because, again, as Kim said, only 30% of companies have a plan for layoffs. And I think a lot of what we see in terms of negative impact comes from good intentions and no plan. And so we've used this quote in our speaking engagements. Kim found it. It's from Andy Grove. He was the CEO of Intel. And he said, bad companies are destroyed by crisis. Good companies survive them. Great companies are improved by them.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that.
And so we're trying to help organizations plan for a healthy response to a crisis so that they can actually move forward in the best possible way.
Do you all have like an example of a company? Because I was sitting here trying to think of one myself. Do you have an example of a company that has done this really well and wound up improving? Like, I can think of a crisis, like the quintessential crisis where a company comes out better, but it has nothing to do with layoffs, was Tylenol, right? Like, that company was like, oh my God, people are dying taking our pills. We don't know exactly what has happened here. And like, they didn't play any games. They went, we don't know, pull everything.
Yeah.
And I was, I think, in fourth grade when that happened. And I still remember, and recent incidents aside, people have always trusted Tylenol. Partly because when they knew that there was potential for harm,
they put the people first.
Couldn't
they put
fault
people first versus
how
profits.
they reacted.
Yeah.
And they put the people first. Right. So, I mean, like, that's a great example of like a company in crisis, like just really actually improving because of how they reacted. But do you have one that is specific to layoffs?
I think for us, we've seen companies who have done parts of it well. Mm-hmm. But what is, I think, problematic is that the norm is this cut the person off way. There is no norm for doing it well. And so that's what we're trying to shape and create is this is the way you can do it well. And so we're taking pieces that we've been able to collect from research about what companies have done well. We know what creates engagement with employees. We know what creates higher performance with people. So we're using the research that's out there about what creates the outcomes that we're looking for and what creates the outcomes that we aren't. And we're helping organizations plan in that way. But I can't think of a specific one, although I'm sure there are people who have done it well. I have heard recently of quite a few colleagues of mine who have been let go being given 3 months or, being able to stay on. And one of the beautiful things about that is it's kind of like breaking up with somebody, but still having to see them for the next 3 months. They're starting to all of a sudden not romanticize the company as they were and kind of find the things that they can get tired of and the good reasons to go so that by the time they're exiting, they've given all they can and also they're ready to move on to the next chapter.
Yeah. I mean, that can be also a brutal phase. We call that de-identification. So,
Yes.
when you identify with a company, you see all the things and all the ways that you're similar. And that's very binding.
Yes.
When you de-identify, that you are breaking those ties. And so you're this is just so automatic that you basically start to see all the ways in which it is screwed up.
Yes.
I always think about divorce because I think most people have seen a divorce somewhere in their life where two people that seem to generally get along okay. I mean, they might have had their moments. We might have had some inclination, but as soon as one of them decides it's over, they can't control themselves. All they see is how things have jacked up.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of a downside to that, and that's part of the healing process that does have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what we're saying is that helping people it's not an end where you got thrown out. It's just part of your evolution.
Yes.
And so in helping people actually find the next point on their storyline that isn't inside your organization, they don't have to actually sever the relationship. In a divorce, you want to be done with this person forever. And in many respects with organizations, yes, we need them to go for various reasons, but we don't necessarily actually want to permanently sever the relationship. I can't tell you how many times I've been in an organization and somebody has left and come back and left and come back.
I'm a boomeranger.
Yeah. And also they already have relationships with people that are going to go on. And so this, the more that you can maintain that relationship aspect, I think the easier it is for the people who remain to not feel I kind of got to choose between my company and this person I care about. And
I equate it to divorce with kids because you think about that, the relationship changes, but most people who are divorced and have kids have a continued relationship and their transactional relationship looks very different day to day. Their relational relationship looks very different, but they're still connected. They're still tethered and they still interact around these kids or this, topic. And so I think it's that just because something changes doesn't mean it has to be severed. It can evolve. I like that word that you use, Cindi. It can evolve. And I think that's what we're talking about is evolving the relationship and changing the transaction, but evolving the relationship.
Yeah, we're even seeing on some of these mass layoffs, a new term has been coined, and that is layoff loop. So we're seeing companies who lay off a mass amount of people, then for whatever reason, need some people back and will actually rehire. So there's sort of, and I think in some ways in manufacturing, that has kind of been around for a while. We didn't have maybe a name for it, but boomerangers, it's very common.
That makes me think, I mean, not that I don't want people to have the freedom to come back and rehire people, or that people have the freedom to feel like that they could go back if they liked the company. But to some degree, that makes me think they didn't really know what they had. Yeah. And
that's reality, right?
Fired blindly. Yeah, that is kind of reality. It is, yeah. But it does, I think that goes to maybe a little bit what we were talking about before, that planning process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And companies we really encourage, one of the things I think that Collette and I both feel really strongly about is encouraging companies to come up with a very personal offboarding plan. So doing what's right for their company and being intentional in that. So almost flipping that intentionality of the intentionality is there, but we're redirecting it to think about how you really want this to go down. It doesn't have to be 3 months. It could be a really effective 3 days. I saw somebody effectively offboarded in 2 days, very respectfully, and plenty of time to wrap up. So lots of times it depends on the role somebody has. If their role can be wrapped up in a couple of days, then do that. If it takes a couple of months, then do that. But really thinking through kind of what's right for the company and the culture and kind of everybody involved. So there are a lot more choices than I think that people think there are.
Right.
We tend
There's
to
more
think
of a
we have
dimension.
to do it this one way. And it's, to Colette's point, and I'm not divorced with children, so you'll have to correct me, but often when there are children involved, don't they sit down with somebody and they create a custody plan, and it's, well, here's where the kids are going to go then. And so even in that situation with parents, divorcing parents and children, there's a plan, right? So they're thinking about how are we going to make this successful, which is what we know we're encouraging companies to do is to really ask every step of the way, how can we do this with empathy for everybody?
Yeah, I agree. Any last thoughts?
I think we have seen this when we've spoken to groups about this. There's this light bulb goes off of, it doesn't have to be this way. I think it's been this way for so long that people don't forget that there's a choice around this and how to do this. And so we absolutely can help. And Kim and I are doing offboarding program design workshops for HR professionals. And so we're really working to help people do the work to prepare for this if it does happen. But when you're in crisis is not the time to create the solid plan about how to get through the crisis. And so that's what we're trying to help organizations do, is really think about it now, so that if that happens, or if this is a situation you find yourself in, you've got that piece done. You follow the plan that you've already created.
I mean, so, I'm pro people. So I'm pro management, leadership, and pro employee. I recognize that all of those categories involve people, so they're messed up. But I often say, when you're taking on a new management role, you have to figure out how to let go of people.
Yeah.
And you have to, that's one of the first things you have to do, because to maintain a culture, you have to be able to have that ability, even if you really try to not use it. Even if your main default is, okay, can I shift this person around? Can I develop them? What can I do to try to get the value that the organization needs to keep them? That should be your first intent if possible. But you will, as a manager, have to let somebody go at some point. The scale, I don't know. Like that varies, but you will have to. And so this idea of getting in there and immediately understanding how to do that and having a plan to do it so that way you do it well has a lot of validity to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Across industries, it used to be, I don't know if the statistic has shifted in recent years. I'll have to go look again. But the statistic used to be that a healthy organization should have about 11% turnover for whatever reason, right? So in other words, a company shouldn't just be the same people for 30 years. You need fresh ideas. It should be, organizations are sort of organic in nature, right? So there needs to be some sort of coming and going, and that's very natural and can have a lot of benefits. So to your point, yes, people are going to leave for a variety of reasons. So you can also handle voluntary exits poorly. Right. Mm-hmm. So somebody can say, I'm leaving and really get the cold shoulder. It's happened to me before, or you can get, a party and then you have end up having a great relationship. Mm-hmm. So exits are going to happen.
Yeah. The problem with voluntary exits and how, and again, like people are watching even on the voluntary exit is I think that sometimes managers feel like they're being rejected.
Yeah.
Like the same thing, it's just reversed.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. It is. And they're not wrong. The person has decided someplace else is better for them. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't necessarily mean you were bad. It just means that this person is developing in a way and this other organization is better suited to helping them move in that direction. Or just flat out, like it's a pyramid. Right. Fewer people on the top than on the bottom. And if you do want to rise, it often means you do have to leave. And understanding that that's what people are trying to do and being happy for them, even when it spikes problems for you, I think would go a long way towards not just having like that longer term relationship. Because again, people come back.
Yes.
But also for the people who are there to not hear you badmouth them. Oh, they screwed that up.
Yeah. I think there's a thread. I think there's a thread through organizations laying people off, through new managers understanding that they will have to let people go, through employees leaving. And that thread is you don't have to lose the relationship. That is absolutely unnecessary. Think about what it would look like to recognize that and acknowledge that when people leave, that relationship can remain and it will look different, but it's not the severing. And so I think that's what we just don't embrace, but the choice is there. The choice is there for everyone to maintain that relationship and change the transactional nature of what that looks like. And so I think that feels less threatening, like I've done something wrong or you've done something. Like we don't have to do that to each other. We can just maintain that thread. And I think that is just an incredibly important piece for the whole process.
I think that that's actually really important. We do have a mindset in organizations of machinery.
Yeah.
That like people are like just another piece of machinery in the system. And when we're done with them, we can get rid of them and maybe upgrade mm-hmm. With a new person who is a new piece in the machinery versus like this time matters. And I have this relationship and this relationship may not be where like we see each other all the time, but it's enduring. And we have like this web of connections where both of us are important in that web. And if we look at it that way, then does that make us actually treat the people differently when we're going to start seeing each other less?
Yeah. I love the way you thought that and spoke that out, Cindi. I think that's that has implications way beyond the layoff, right? That has implications for the entire employee life cycle. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how oftentimes, even if somebody doesn't come in and out of your organization, like you're in an industry, you're going to conferences, like you're going to you have employees, other employees where you share the relationship. You're going to want opportunities with customers and they may share a relationship. Like you still are in this web.
Yeah.
And if you think about it that way, I mean, it's definitely probably a much more collective mindset than what we're used to in the US. But if you think about it that way, then you do have to be more careful with these relationships and not treat them as so disposable.
Yes. Absolutely.
Kim, you got any last thoughts on the way out?
I guess I'll just say, for me, the part of this that I tend to be most passionate about is that take that time to plan and think it through. As a company, you're going to reach a certain stage where you should have an offboarding plan and you should have that conversation as a leadership team. What do we value here? And how are we going to live those values in every stage and not ignore the exit part of it, and think through all the different kinds of exits and how you want to do it intentionally? Because just to add on to what you were saying a minute ago, if we're not in this, if we're not in business for people, what are we in business for?
Yeah.
You know, I think this is coming up a lot with AI. I think it was Sam Altman recently said, his goal is the company runs itself. And I was like, well, how boring. Why? Why do you want a company that runs itself with machines?
Because they're tech and they never really did very well with people. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding there. So some tech people do great with people, but you always think about
to them.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. I hear, I can't remember if I've talked about this on the show or not, but I have a family member who really likes Elon Musk. And it is telling me, I didn't hear Elon say this, but it's telling me that Elon was in an interview and was saying, isn't it great at some point, like we won't have to work and machines will do it all. And I just said in more colorful words than this, that is some utopian crap right there. And I can't imagine a world that I want to live in less, because like, we're supposed to have purpose. Mm-hmm. And this is talking about just like stripping out the purpose. And our system is capitalism, which means people buying and people interacting and people exchanging. And so I'm not like opposed to AI. I actually love AI in so many ways. But you still have to have room for people. I don't think we figured that out
somewhere
yet.
in this exiting process, and apparently it was in the late 70s and early 80s, we just took the people part out of it. Mm-hmm. And we just said, let's do this transactionally. Let's do this quick and painless for the company. Let's put the company as though it were separate from the people. Let's put that first, when in fact the company is the people are the company.
All right, ladies, thank you so much. And you know what? We got to ask them a question. What should we ask them in the comments?
Okay. I kind of want to know how many people have a plan, like with the organization.
I like that.
Yeah, okay. Because only 30% have a plan. So I'm curious, your listeners, I have a feeling, are probably more likely to have a plan, but I'd love to know.
Right, because they're actually thinking about it. They're trying to improve. Yeah. There's definitely a skew there. Okay, so if you have a plan in place for how you would if you had to lay people off, then put a P down in the comments.
And if it's one that you like, put a plus sign. If it's one that you don't like, put a minus.
Okay. Yeah, that's a very good point. All right. P, if you have a plan, plus if you like the plan, minus if you don't. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on, you two. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think you're onto something. I mean, it's basically trying to make leadership, I think, more human.
Yes.
And less military, less machine.
That's right. Because it is human. It is human. So we're just kind of leaning into what it already is.
Yes. It is kind of amazing how we have done a lot of things to avoid that reality.
So true.
And how do they find you?
They can find more information about empathetic exits at www.myopen360.com.
Excellent. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Kim and Collette. I appreciate you and you thinking about really this important stage that often just really gets dropped.
Yeah. Thank you, Cindi.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
See you the next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Management Muse. We are a podcast / YouTube channel that we hope is entertaining and educational. If you are on YouTube, we would appreciate you subscribing and maybe leaving a comment and a like. If you are on any of the podcasts listening to this, we would appreciate stars, following, comments, all the good stuff. We want to say thank you to Sarah and Rebecca. And then just as a last minute reminder, we also want to mention that we are management and communication professionals working in the field, but also have degrees that back us in science. All that being said, we are talking in generalities on this podcast. We do not actually know your particular situation. So proceed with common sense and maybe a little bit of experimentation on your end. And we hope that you make the world a more beautiful place by making work a more enjoyable place. See you next time on Management Muse.